Hey, everybody. I'm so excited to come to you today and share a video that is so close to my heart. And it has to do about the reunification of love and sex together and why these two things have been separated to the detriment of humans. And this video is coming from my heart and my soul to you. This is really not an intellectual transmission that is meant to be received at the level of mind. And so, right off the bat, I just ask um, for you to be able to shift your energy into your heart and into your body, to be able to receive this um, in a way that is not just kind of consuming information or binging content. This is a topic that is really profound and deep and special to me. And so, welcome. And I think this video is going to be a little bit longer. I had the impulse to record this video last night and went through a whole process that is a reflection of my own journey over really a lifetime of healing love and sexuality. And yet there was so much that wanted to come through all at once. So I did need to write down notes, and I have several pages of notes that you'll see me referring to. I don't always do this, but the amount that wanted to be shared that was streaming through was really um, overwhelming. And so, just even for the accessibility of this video for you as the viewer watching it to be able to digest the information, I just asked for a little bit of support from, the thing that knows more than me to be able to organize it a little bit better. And so there's a nice blend here of, the flow, the inspiration came from a bigger place, but also the organization. And so we're going to be talking about the marriage of love and sexuality, which can be a topic that maybe is seemingly deceptively simple. And we're going to really take it deep. And so I just wanted to open with a level of relatability for many people coming to this video, which is that I think a lot of us know the difference between a sexual exchange with somebody that is strictly on the level of physical attraction, um, and maybe really centered in the lower centers, chakra centers, lust frequency, when we're just physically attracted to somebody and we engage on that level. This is not a video where I will demonize that from a moral perspective, but I also want to really give like a balanced view of why maybe there's an expansion possible for us. So that's like the heart of this video. So we know the difference between what that kind of exchange feels like versus if we're sharing sexual energy with somebody that we truly love. For example, in a monogamous, committed relationship, and just most people can relate on some level to the difference in terms of the quality and even the nourishment of that kind of exchange. And so here's what I'll begin to refer to my notes here. And so today's topic is how we can unify love and sex as part of bringing sexuality back into the higher realms. And so we know that currently sexuality is very much swimming in the lower, darker realms right now. Things have gotten pretty wild out there, pretty dark. On a higher vantage point, there's a truth that everything is happening for a reason. However, we're here in terms of my understanding to really co-create with the energies at play here and not necessarily participate or not participate in life as it's unfolding as like a passive observer. So that actually wouldn't be a passive participant because you wouldn't really be participating. You're just kind of like going with the flow. And there's a beautiful aspect for all of us to surrender and trust the process. But the way that I work with relationships, sexuality, um, and all of the healing has to do with us co-creating with the bigger thing. So what I mean by that is that I don't think we're necessarily here, at least some of us, to unconsciously participate and just be in this energy, especially of what's running right now, of anything goes, especially with sexuality. That can be part of the process of healing. I'm going to get into that today. But I do think that understanding some of these higher truths as it relates to polarity integration, which is a very, very um, it's the heart and the soul of a lot of what I teach. Polarity integration, meaning that we're going to find an integrated balance between two polarities. It's really important to start to understand some of the higher spiritual truths so that we can actually show up and consciously co-create with everything that's going on and not get tricked or fooled or pulled into some of these directions that are very, very tempting and confusing. So this is where it can be really important to, of course, we're going to trust our intuition and our soul and ourselves as sovereign beings, but it's also very important to find mentors and people who have some higher level understanding of what's going on, especially in this day and age of a lot of confusion when it comes to sexuality and relationships. Because sexuality and relationships hold incredibly important keys to the evolution of humanity, we just don't have time anymore for people to start to figure everything out individually from scratch. So this is where we get into a good blend of relying on mentors and helpers and people who can assist us along the way that we trust using our discernment, while also ultimately seeking to become empowered so that we can stand on our own 2 feet along the way. So I just wanted to bring that to this video as well. So this topic of reunifying love and sex, right? Because there has been a divorce that has happened that has separated love and sex from each other, that has caused some problems for humanity. And it is part of the dragging down of the objectification of sexuality to divorce it from spirituality, to make it so that it's simply a physical act or just strictly on the material level, pleasure based. This is when it's stuck in the lower realms and it's very destructive and damaging at that level, because when we let it get to that level of objectification, then we typically are engaging with another person in terms of either it becomes a transactional sexual thing, consciously or unconsciously, where we are either feeding off another person or we're allowing ourselves to be fed off of. When the sacral or the sexual center down here in the hips is cut off from the heart, and there is not a flow of energy going between these two centers, or you can just simply say if you're engaging in sexuality where it's only pleasure based and there's not love in it, then that is something that is dangerous. And I'm going to get into that. There's 5 pages of notes, so I should probably stick with just reading these and then adding little bits. Otherwise, this will be 4 hours long. But it's not to demonize that, because it is a process that many people have to go through, especially if they're healing from shame around sexuality. It is okay to open to pleasure for pleasure's sake, but that is not the end point. It's a point on the journey of healing and growth, but it's not, that represents something where people can get very stuck. So this whole video is really about helping us to understand how we can bring sexuality into the higher realms, which is very, very much way beyond something that's just nice to have, because of the state of the world right now and the fact that sexuality generates the frequency of the planet, because sexuality generates the frequency of human relationships, whether we're aware of this or not. And I go much deeper on that particular topic in a video that's in an audio, sorry, that's literally called Sexuality Generates the Frequency of the Planet. That's in the Visionaries. That was a very strong teaching that came through that really encourages all of us to be able to step into more personal responsibility with stepping into a higher level of consciousness when it comes to running our sexual current and how we can do sexual shadow work, and how I would argue that that is part of our responsibility to unpack our sexuality from conditioning, programming, and trauma so that we can actually start to run the higher expression of it, and how this actually does create and generate the frequency of the planet. And when things are out of balance, there's a tie-in between lust frequency that is running wild to the extreme levels and war frequency. And so I get into that. I know it seems for most people you don't correlate lust frequency and war frequency, but there's definitely a correlation. So I get more into it in that audio. And I'll touch upon it a little bit today. But this whole thing is so important to understand why love and sex were divorced from each other, and how when we use very simple, powerful um, shifts in our relationships with our partner, right? If you're in a sexual relationship, a love relationship, how when we bring love into it, and I'll get to that later in this video, it can be a total game changer. And so we're going to get into all of this here. But ultimately, this divorcing of love from sexuality has harmed us. And it really does continue to be used as a tool of manipulation. Mostly right now, as it's running to feed the anything goes kind of boundaryless sexual misery programming or agenda. I know some of this language is very, very strong, but right now there's a lot of confusion that's running within sexuality that's creating a lot of misery and human suffering in the way that it's playing out, and it's being sold to people under the guise of empowerment. So there's a polarization that is really still quite actively running here, a polarization when it comes to sexuality, where on the one end of the spectrum, we're warned that sex is bad, it's shameful, it's dirty, it's sinful, versus the other polarity where it really is this anything goes, promiscuity and just like free sex painted as liberation and empowerment. And so there's these two polarities that are very much still running. Although the exciting thing here is that there is a really clear opportunity that I see. And through my work with clients, I see as well as we start to heal and integrate sexuality and unpack and heal any shame that might have been programmed in, while also understanding that we do need a level of discernment when it comes to who we share this with. When we can come into a more integrated perspective, there's such deep healing as well as evolution that's possible on an individual and also collective level, physically, emotionally, mentally, and certainly spiritually. So sexuality is actually a very spiritual thing. And that was another thing that occurred, right? There was a split where sexuality and spirituality were divorced from each other. And so this really is the separation of love and sex into these two separate things is part of the manipulation agenda. And so it's really important to be able to wake up to this and to understand and get really honest with ourselves on how we've been participating, perhaps, in this, which most people have been. So there's not shame there, but it's really just about getting honest with ourselves and moving towards healing. And this video will be really good for you to watch if you want to get a good understanding of my overall philosophy on sexuality, how I work with people, and where I'm guiding people towards. So I'm really happy to share this with you. So sexuality definitely became distorted when it was severed from love, and that severing created these two polar opposite responses to it. And so, of course, as I've been speaking about quite a bit over the past year, whether it's this topic that I'm presenting today to you, or really any, I think humanity is starting to wake up to the fact that anytime that we have things that are significantly polarized, we're typically being presented with a false choice where we think erroneously that it's an either or choice and we have to pick a side. But I think now we're understanding that this is number one, it's related to the divide and conquer strategy that is used to divide humanity and weaken humanity, but also as it relates to levels of human consciousness and the expansion that is really currently happening, right? Even though the forces that be are trying to interfere with it, we're being shown that it's that these are false choices. And so there's usually an integrated third way that's a totally brand new, evolved way beyond this false choice, which also represents a very narrow and trapped way of looking at things, that we get tricked and fooled into thinking that we only have these two choices. So the good news is that I think people are starting to really talk about this and notice the polarization that's happening. And that maybe it's not ever going to be just simply choosing one of the sides and everything will get sorted out. But, it really is polarity integration is quite often the answer to all of the world's problems, in my opinion. And so this process of polarity integration involves us taking the best of both sides. So typically, there's wisdom and truth oftentimes, again, whether it's this topic today about sexuality or any, where there's truth and wisdom on both sides, right? It's not black or white. It's not that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so we take the truth and the wisdom on both sides, we merge them together, which is easier said than done because a lot of people think these are opposite and opposing rather than complementary energies, which is another lie. That's not how it works, right? Just think about masculine, feminine, yin and yang. These things are seeming polarities, but they actually work together in perfect complementary balance, is what I'm trying to say. So the process of polarity integration involves us taking the best of both sides, merging them together while also performing the process of alchemy on the shadow aspects of both sides to transmute and encourage them each to embody their highest expression. So I know I'm getting kind of out there, but anyone that's familiar with some of the work I've put out on Substack, like there's a 3-article series. The first article is called Alchemy, Divine Union, and Spiritual Enlightenment. I talk about what I just said a minute ago in relation to working with masculine and feminine energies towards true divine union. So it involves an understanding of polarity integration as well as alchemization of the shadow. And so I'm going to point you, by the way, to many different places where you can go deeper, because I know that we're getting into some things that might be new to some people, depending on if you're new to my work. And some of this stuff maybe doesn't make sense. It's okay. Please just stick with it, this video, because I think by the end, you'll start to, wrap your head around certain things that I'm saying. And so this is actually this is, first of all, a deeply spiritual path. So whether you use sexuality or relationships or masculine, feminine, or the balancing of any seeming polarity, this is a deeply spiritual path of union and coming into greater wholeness and integration rather than being so separate. So there's a lot more. I'm going to take a sip of water. So obviously, there was a pendulum swing from conservative sexuality. And then, just think about the last 100 years to then the 60s. There was that pendulum swing that happened. to free love. And, there's the swing back and forth that happens quite often when we look at these polarities and how they play out. So the trap here with any situation where there's a pendulum swing is that we just keep flip-flopping from one side to the other. And with sexuality, you can even see this happening because now there's a response where people are wanting to go back to more conservative values and religious values and all of that. And there's a beautiful aspect to counterbalance movements and energies that come up. And they're all needed and necessary. But of course, as I said, the trap here, if you don't understand integration and you don't understand alchemy, is that we just flip flop from one side to the other. And that's not really the invitation for humans to evolve. So the counterbalanced energies that pop up naturally, it really is part of the organic impulse towards balance. But there's a trap there, like I just said. And a lot of times because the forces that be, the powers that be, whatever you want to call those things, I'm also thinking beyond just like people to more like spiritual influences and energies, whether those are assisting humanity or trying to interfere, understand how all of this works and how the counterbalance energies work. And so sometimes when these organic impulses to counterbalance come up, and there's the best of intentions, those movements are interfered with and they're hijacked. And so we see this all over the place. I've spoken about it in relation to feminism as well in some of my videos. And so it's the same thing that's happening right now as well with some of the so-called, trad movements. And now we're zooming out beyond sexuality to encompass relationships at large, but this definitely ties in here. And so the key here is that instead of having an either or mentality of having to choose one of two camps, we are moving towards both and to be able to hold the nuance and the integration. A lot of times for people, they can start to grasp this intellectually, but actually putting it into practice can be very difficult. So I'm going to try as best as I can in this video to make this practical and not just speak about it in terms of like theories. And so hopefully by the end of this video, I'll have done that. So as I said before, let's just bring it back to sexuality. Both sides actually have truth, right? Where there's a reason why maybe it's warranted to have a more conservative view of working with sexuality. So there's wisdom and truth. There's also wisdom and truth on the other side, which is that sexuality is actually so beautiful, and meant to be celebrated. It's just that both sides are also mixed with a lot of distortions, which is really just shadow. So that's why earlier I said that what we do in this case is that we really get clear of what is the best of the best on both sides and what is the shadow. When I talk about alchemy, divine union, and spiritual enlightenment, which is article 1 of a 3-part series, I'll link it in the show notes. I apply this to masculine, feminine, because there's a difference. For example, when we speak about feminine, there's a difference between divine feminine and shadow feminine. There's a difference between divine masculine and shadow masculine. So there's a difference between conservative sexuality in its highest intention versus the shadow that's running. And then on the other side, there's a difference between a celebration of sexuality versus the shadow and how it's running. And so I'll get more into this as we go forward. So there is a truth on the conservative side that sexuality can be used for dark purposes. And so we shouldn't let it run wild. I think a lot of us know this intuitively. Although as we are healing from maybe programming that some of us have received in terms of sexuality being sinful or bad, there's a part where we might need to go onto the other side. For many people, that's true, to explore pleasure for pleasure's sake. But getting back to the conservative viewpoint, we do know, most of us understand that there's dangers of what can happen when we are overtaken by sexual urges, or what I call lust frequency, that is just the sexual urge running on a physical level, separated and divorced from love and from the heart. Many of us know intuitively in our hearts and in our souls, beyond the programming, right, that there's a real danger there. And so with where we're at sexually collectively right now, people are starting, you almost can't hide from it anymore in terms of the shadow that is running, even way beyond the darkness of pornography. There's everything happening on the world stage right now is showing us how severely sick and twisted it can get. And so we're being asked to face the shadow, see it collectively, but ultimately, all we have control over is facing our own internal shadow and doing our work in here, which is what this video is hopefully going to nudge you towards and encourage you to do, and that you see the importance of why far beyond. I often say that this whole topic, whether it's sexuality or relationships, it's far beyond just something that would be nice to have or make our lives happier. This really does have to do with massive healing and evolution of humanity. And that's something I really do want to convey during this video. So addictions, right? Sex addiction and everything is very, very real. And it's so crazy because when I first started to practice as a psychologist, even, this was 11, let's see, sorry, it was 15 years ago. It was such a different landscape back then. And even for people who have been practicing in the field of psychology or mental health, the rise of sex addiction is alarming. And we know why, we know what the factors are. But the only reason I put that here is because addiction is very real. And the manipulation of sexuality within humans is one of the easiest ways to control people, something that I've spoken about quite a bit. And so I think a lot of us are starting to really face this truth and metabolize it, right? Which we do, we need to be able to, so that we can come into greater balance. So it's not that there's anything wrong or evil or demonic about sexuality, but we also just want to be in right relationship with it. And so let's see where I'm at right here. So less frequency, right, that we can get hypnotized by if it's just allowed to run wild without boundaries, right, without impulse control. It has quite a spectrum of expression and ways that it can manifest. So what I mean by this is that it can look so many different ways, right? On the subtle levels in relationships, even if you are with a partner that you love and care about, on the subtle levels, if it really is just less frequency running in the lower centers, even in this relationship with your partner, what can happen is that it can be an extractive energy where one person is taking and the other person is being used. So even in relationships where the intention is like, yeah, we love and care about each other. So this is the more subtle levels of how it can play out if it's not really balanced with the heart. And as I move forward towards the end, I'm going to really help you with some practical ways where you can actually make some adjustments that aren't even really that hard in relationships to make sure that you're not actually participating in this unconsciously or consciously with your partner. But that's sort of the subtle levels of how it can manifest, right? Less frequency when it's just running wild without being connected to the heart. But it also, of course, can get into more overtly transactional interactions sexually between people, where it also can get into the darker realms of domination, violence, and all the way to war frequency. This is something that I shared earlier, but there is a connection between lust frequency and war frequency when there's a lack of heart and love and care and concern for other humans, when we start to divorce the heart from being involved in any way, shape, and form. And so it's strange for a lot of people to think about the link between lust and sexuality and war frequency, but I'm just going to assure you there is a connection. And so maybe that's something that you can take and that you want to dive into a little bit on your own. But this is really what happens, right? And so on the other side of things, there's also a truth that sexuality is beautiful, is deeply healing, and we shouldn't demonize or suppress it. This is on the progressive side. So there's also wisdom there you can see, right, in the highest expression. But when taken to the extreme, it's sold to us as empowerment or liberation to just be in this anything goes, promiscuous, carefree sort of way, when this is actually another form of being very, very trapped. And so this is where it gets into humanity really starting to understand the energy exchange between two people. And it's not just a physical exchange where maybe, you're getting signs and signals that maybe this isn't like the best thing to do. Maybe there's some healthy shame whenever you're doing this, which that's a whole conversation about the usefulness of healthy shame versus toxic shame. And I'm not meaning to instill shame because everybody watching this is adults and human. So it's not about berating ourselves for choices, but just like with humility and humbleness to know that sometimes it is okay to feel healthy shame versus toxic shame. That's a whole conversation. I'll link to a podcast where I speak about the difference between the two and how also the programming around all shame is bad is leading to has already led to the creation of a shameless society that is basically boundaryless. Because at the highest intention of healthy shame is actually to encourage humans to engage in really positive, caring, pro-social behavior with each other. And I always use the example of, if we go and we punch someone or we hurt someone, and there's the very natural, impulsive, healthy shame. That's actually a good thing because it's helping us to become better, more loving people. And it's actually a very powerful shaper of behavior in a really beautiful way. Versus toxic shame is used as a weapon when people are trying to forcefully instill their beliefs on how we should be onto us. So that's a whole different thing. So healthy shame is actually part of this conversation also, and it has to do with us setting loving boundaries with ourselves and knowing that it's okay to actually practice some level of impulse control. That definitely comes in here as well. And learning how to work with your sexuality in a way such that sometimes we do need to have loving boundaries with ourselves. And so there's this beautiful balance between recently I've been talking about the difference between suppression and indulgence as another false choice of like we either have to suppress and repress all this stuff that's bad, or we just move into complete indulgence and moving through these two extremes, and neither actually is really the way. So I spoke about that in depth in the pop psychology article I wrote on Substack with a really cool chart that shows you the difference between these two sides and all of the correlations and how this relates to shadow masculine versus shadow feminine, to authoritarianism versus complete permissiveness. And there's a lot of correlations in that article where you can start to see and take even this conversation and zoom it out to apply it to all these different areas. So on the progressive side, it's really sold to us as empowerment, as liberation. And then many people actually come to terms with the fact that this actually is not true empowerment. So when allowed to unfold naturally, This is typically an organic process of healing our relationship with sexuality that will lead ultimately to integration for many people. But like I said, the powers that be understand the usefulness of keeping people stuck and trapped in one way or the other, right? And so, as I said before, this relates perfectly to the conversation about repression versus indulgence. And so, I'll link to the video that I posted on YouTube as well as the companion Substack article, and how we can really start to work with this integrated third way. Some of the dangers, just to go back to just like letting the sexuality run wild, the unconscious energy exchange that happens is that we pick up everything that is in that person's energy field, which is really just the subconscious. So it's not just a physical act that occurs between two people. This is why people are starting to refer to sexuality as an energy exchange. And so there's things that we pick up from other people, especially in that moment of such incredible openness and surrender. And that's a huge issue. So as we start to understand the energetic consequences of this, I can assure you from personal lived experience, the amount of cleanup work and healing and release and deprogramming, especially energetically, which is totally possible, is major and can take quite a bit of time for a lot of people. And it's not just working on the energetic level to clear and transmute, but also on the psychological level of healing from the emotional, and the mental consequences of participating in exchanges with people where the heart and the love is devoid in those exchanges, which on the surface can seem fun or empowering, but actually have very detrimental impacts on us and our well-being. So the marriage or the unification of love and sex back together is actually really critical, especially in these times of major confusion when it comes to sexuality and its expression. So I wrote an article on Substack that's number 2 of the 3-part series. It's called Toward Sexual Sovereignty. That does remain a primary foundational piece that goes very, very deep for you on a practical level to start to understand how to actually heal your relationship with your sexuality and start to do sexual shadow work to unpack the programming, the trauma, the conditioning that lives for all of us in our sexuality and why it's even important to do it in the first place, right? And so I'll put 10 different links to all of these things in the description. So the divorce of love and sex, cutting them off from each other, it's really not the natural order for humans, and we do need to restore the union of the two. And the reunification of love and sex, from what I can see, from my heart to yours, is the major source of healing for humanity, right? To be able to heal and evolve, and it goes way beyond just our sexual lives. And so when these two things are divorced and sexuality exists in isolation without love in it, we see the splitting into these two polar responses that I've been spending some time talking about. So either sexuality is bad, wrong, or something to be indulged endlessly without limits, right? And this also I have in parentheses relates to this is if you're familiar with the tarot, that is the devil card in the tarot in its highest meaning, right? It's not something to be afraid of. It's just that card represents the enslavement and the addiction aspect of when we get stuck in these lower realms. And actually, the key, if you're familiar with tarot, to be able to transmute is actually through the Lover's card. And so the Devil card is key 15, and the tarot 1 plus 5 together is 6. That's the Lover's card. And so we are merging love and sexuality back together. So this is actually where I start to bring it into the practical level of what does this look like in relationships, okay? So when we bring love and sex together, it's deeply healing, and we don't need to get super technical. We don't need to get a million books on tantra or sacred sexuality, and go for it if you want to. Spent a lot of time in that. And what I'm shown time and time again is bringing it back to the simplicity of what I'm going to start to share with you here, of how you can start to really work with this in your own relationship. And if you're not currently in a romantic relationship, that's okay. This can be very useful to start to understand so that you can pave the way for what you want your partnership to look like, your future partnership to look like. And what I'm about to share with you, it's not about being perfect or implementing all of this stuff perfectly. This truly is a path. That's why I'm not going to be able to point you to one book that tells you how to do all the things. This is a path that can be a lifelong path. And so when I talk about the path of relationships and the path of sexuality, if you're new here, go to the page on my website. It's called Start Here, and I give so many free um, articles, podcasts of free work that you can start to engage in to put this work into practice of what I call the path of relationships, to use relationships and the everyday material that comes up in our life as our healing, as the material that we use to heal, to do our shadow work, and to ultimately grow and evolve together. And so this is work that you can start to do even if you don't have a partner. Trust me, there's quite a bit to work with. But if you are in a romantic relationships, when we ensure that love and sex are working together, first, just think about the state, what I playfully call the state of the union between you two. How are things going? How are things feeling relationally between you two? How is the love really feeling between you two, right? Is it expressing and flowing freely or not? It doesn't need to be perfect, but it's just an invitation to start here before we jump right into sexuality. This is why sometimes I get concerned when couples look for, techniques or positions or, all of the things that really ultimately don't mean a whole lot if the relational field of the relationship is all out of sorts. There's no amount of techniques that are going to fix that problem. And so this is why I encourage couples to really be able to tend to the field of love, right? Are there blocks? Are there wounds? Are there unresolved hurts in the relationship? What happens sexually in the bedroom is often a reflection of the relationship at large. This is something I talk about quite a bit, and it's really true. I think a lot of us understand this. Are both people open in the heart center to each other? Right? Or not? Or is it closed because of lack of trust or safety or care or connection? This is where we start to understand that truly higher level sexuality is meant to be um, a physical, emotional, mental, and a spiritual experience. And so, in that regard, in the relationship, we need to be able to tend to the relationship at large and how it's feeling and how things are going, right? So, this is obviously a deep topic to be able to understand that the relational health of what's going on between you two has everything to do with how the sexuality is going to be expressed and worked with, right? So just simply keeping the relationship itself healthy through open, loving, honest communication can take you so far, right? Maintaining love, closeness, connection, on a day-to-day basis with your partner. We're human, we're not perfect, but I'm talking about big picture level here. How is the relationship going, right? So I have here sexual technique can never override relational truth, right? You could have the best partner ever that is like knows all of the tricks and like it's just not going to make a difference, especially on the side of women who are not typically able to open their heart if there's not that sense of attunement, presence and care, right? And it's true for men as well, but this is a lot of times, especially true for women, right? And so sexual dysfunction or anything that isn't going well sexually often mirrors relational wounds, right? And so these two things are linked. So there's unspoken grief, anger, resentment, or lack of safety. All of these things they're going to negatively impact the sexual connection. At the same time that we maintain that closeness, that connection, that love, the togetherness, the we aspect of a relationship, it's also important in this conversation of sexual connection that we also want to strive for a connection where we can do the balance of togetherness and separateness. I call it the dance of union and separation. I've gone in depth on this one as well, quite a bit, but we just want to make sure as well when we're talking about sexuality that we're striving for a connection where we're also not running codependency sexually, because this is where sexuality can start to get tinged with things like covert manipulation or control or obligation. And, women can sometimes use sexuality to hook men into relationships. They can use sex to try to hook men relationally. It doesn't usually end up working out very well, but this is one example, right? Where on the other hand, men can often use sex and that physical connection as a replacement for um, relational health and for being able to understand that they also need to tend to the relational field through closeness, connection, communication, and love and care on a daily basis with the partner too. So when both people feel safe and loved in the relationship and the love is flowing and felt, just that alone makes the sexual connection automatically enhanced and deepened. So I think I have a couple pages left, so we still have some things to go through here. Okay, so this alone will take most couples far, just what I spoke about, and really understanding that the relationship in itself and the quality of love between us has a direct impact on sexuality, right? So that alone actually can take you very, very far. And then we start to open up once that is being tended to. And that care, that love, it doesn't need to be perfect, but if it's flowing and both people can feel it, right? Then sexuality turns into an exchange that is just imbued with a lot more love and care for each other. And so this is when you can get into the realms of sharing sexuality with a partner where when you really start to open your heart during that exchange, it's so healing. Tears might come for both people. Lots and lots of sexual healing, any trauma that has occurred on both sides or abuse. This kind of container of love where sexuality is being shared is so potent and so healing. Also, heart healing, too. It's not just if you've experienced sexual trauma, but also trauma of the heart as well in this container of deep love and sexuality combined can be really, really profound. And so during sex with a partner, just it can be so simple. Try to stay connected, enter into the exchange, with love, with open-heartedness to whatever extent is available to you, to make sure that you enter with the intention of this is not just going to be a physical act of stimulation. We are going to be attuned to each other. We're going to be present with each other, eye contact when possible, to be able to get out of your head into your body and into your heart and share that with your partner versus, what some of us have done. I've done this in the past where your eyes are closed and you're just in a different place and you're not there with your partner. This is very, very common. That is something that is not conducive to this type of intimacy. There's a lot of healing. Trust me, I've been through all of it that needs to happen for some people to even be able to open their eyes and make eye contact during sex. But these are the pieces to the puzzle that we need to start to open to and slowly move towards. And if you have a lot of trauma, please work with a professional. I do this work with clients. You're welcome to reach out to me or really any person that's trustworthy that can help you start to heal. Oftentimes, depending on our level of trauma, programming, conditioning, a lot of times we do have to work with people to help us. And so, if you're new to practicing sexuality in a more present and open hearted way, all of this can unfold over time, right? Take small steps forward to be more connected and more attuned to your partner. And also just realize a lot of times it's like in the sexual exchange, you might open to these things and then you might start to slip back into becoming less present. And then you just bring yourself back. And it's a practice, right? There's no perfection here, but this is just opening, right? On an energetic perspective, if you've looked into things like Tantra or sacred sexuality, some of the times you'll see a visual of two partners together where there's an infinity symbol that is connecting the two people. And this is beautiful to bring in here because the infinity symbol within both people individually is connecting the heart chakra and the sacral, right? And then you're sharing that with each other. So that's where the infinity symbol comes in that connects both partners. And so we just have to start to think about is like, even in this moment, you can really ask yourself, is my heart and my sacral area, is this channel open? Now, without needing to get too woo-woo here, just see if you can imagine or visualize, is it open? Is it flowing? Some of you work with energy more than others, right? But this is all that it's saying. Is there a connection between my center of love and care and my sexual center, right? Am I willing to bring love into this? And so it doesn't need to be more complicated, but this is where the infinity symbol of the energy exchange comes in as well. And so this is a beautiful thing that I wanted to add here because this is where we start to get into the realization that when love and sex are merged together, it helps us to prevent the power over dynamics that can happen when the sexuality is just running in the lower frequency, in the lust frequency. Because when it's just a purely physical exchange, what oftentimes happens is that one partner is consciously or unconsciously feeding off of the other. And so one partner is taking, the other partner is giving or being used energetically. Again, most of the time this happens unconsciously. But when these two centers are merged together and there is that infinity exchange happening, there is no depletion, there is no taking or extraction energy present because it's a closed system that is self-regenerating. And so this is where this is where things start to get really elevated in terms of the shared field between both people. And so when the sacral flows upwards into the heart, it allows our desire to become elevated and spiritualized up from the materialistic, just solely pleasure-based centers. It starts to be mixed with love into it. And so, vice versa, when the heart energy flows downwards into the sacral area, it allows our love and care for our partner to be physically expressed through the body in an embodied way. And so, this is huge. This is where sexuality becomes a deep embodied expression of your love for the other person. So profound. So, when this happens for me, the expression of sexuality with this level of love and connectedness present for me is the highest expression of love because it represents embodied devotion to my partner that I can't quite put into words. And for me, it represents the most whole and complete expression of love that I can show to him. And it makes a lot of sense because it is the embodied divine union, as I say here, where the human and the God self start to merge together and become one and the same. This is where sexuality, if you think about being stuck in the lower realms, and spirituality or divine energy, when you merge these two in the heart, if you think about the chakra centers, right? We're talking about the lower chakra system with the higher expression of the crown and spiritual energy merging the two in the heart. This is true divine union, right? And so this is an embodied expression of divine union. It's really, really deep. And so when love and pleasure mix together, it prevents the lust frequency from running only through the lower centers, as I spoke about, cut off from the heart. And that's what creates the power imbalance or the feeding off of each other. One person's taking, the other person's depleted or being used consciously or unconsciously. And I already said this, but it bears repeating. So rather than feeding off of each other, the system of energy becomes generative and life-giving for both people. And it truly does contribute to the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health of both individuals and the relationship. The field, the third thing that is created with you and the other person coming together, this field is vivified and also becomes protected from lower forces that seek to come in and try to erode the union, right? Again, it's not about perfection. It's just about understanding the energetic reasons on a higher level of why it's so important not to just let these lower centers run without mixing love into it. This is where you literally do start to get the darker energies, the attachments, the entities, when you're only participating in less frequency, because that particular energy ultimately of power over another person, whether you're being used or whether you're using, is the dynamic that those lower forces feed off of. It's the power over dominator submissive dynamic that I talk about quite a bit. That whether relationally or sexually is definitely not the higher order between people. And so when you mix love and sex together, I'm going to start to wrap up. This is where the shared field, this third thing that you create with the other person, it becomes truly expansive and connected to something higher. And then the couple becomes a conduit for healing divine energy rather than a conduit for the lower power over forces to be working through them. Huge. Okay, this is the last page. So this is where, when I playfully speak about the state of the union, right? Staying attuned as a couple to the third shared field that you co-create with the other person. We're remembering that, the health and the vitality of this third field always tells the truth of where the relationship is at. So we're talking beyond sexually, although sexuality and the exchange is part of this. But if the state of the relationship feels contracted, draining, chaotic, heavy, out of sorts, like there's baggage, people can feel into the energy of how things feel, right? Then something's out of alignment. And right. And that's just an invitation to be able to tend to the relational health with your partner, ideally with both people on board. Right. I'm not telling you how to do it perfectly or that it will play out perfectly. I'm just telling you the truth of some of the energetics and how it impacts the field and what we can do in an ideal situation with our partner to heal things and to be able to move into a more connected, expansive state. So there's an audio that I posted in the Visionaries. It's talking about how relationships, using the metaphor of a boat, that if we try to enter into a relationship or maintain a relationship with a partner where the relationship is like a boat and the boat has holes in it and it's just damaged and it's out of sorts and we're trying to travel together, we're not going to get very far, right? And it's just a reflection of the health of the relationship, right? What do we need to repair within our relationship so that we can actually travel and have beautiful adventures together. And this is also part of creating a healthy, stable foundation relationally with a partner and understanding that that foundation is a living, breathing thing that just like a garden needs to be tended to, it needs to be maintained, right, in your day-to-day interactions with each other. If the field of the relationship feels nourishing, expansive, peaceful, alive, right? Good. I mean, it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Then the relationship is generally in alignment. So it's not about perfection here, but it is about being attuned and paying attention to how things are feeling, right? Between the two of you. Not letting things, build up or not sweeping things under the rug and not tending to them because we all know that that's a recipe for disaster. And I speak about that in my own story as well. So we're going to start to wrap up here. So, yes, it's not about perfection, but it is about attuning to the field between you and I, as a living thing that needs care and attention, and to know that it's always being co-created by both people coming together, right? As a result of what both of us bring to the table on a day-to-day basis, how you can see that this is a fluid thing that actually grows over time. And the relationship with you and your partner is going to look different every single day, right? Year after year after year, it's going to look different. But when we become conscious of our power to co-create, right? And we start to become awake and aware to how this thing is actually cultivated and how we can play an active role, right? Rather than just like wishing for the best in a more passive way, then it's such a beautiful way to bring our relationships up into a greater level of consciousness with each other, right? Okay, so we're almost done. And so when sexuality is heart-led, this is kind of summarizing the main point of what I wanted to share with you. It does become one of the most direct ways that humans can actually embody divine energy. And this gets into the fact that sexual energy is creation energy, it's holy energy. So, although sexuality can be hijacked and pulled into the lower realms, we have to understand that there's an incredibly holy aspect to sexuality where we have forgotten that sexual energy is the energy of creation. And we can use that to co create an actual human child with our partner or co create the state of our union and our relationship, as well as what we want to build and give life to, right? In terms of what we are creating metaphorically together in the relationship. So there's so much to work with here, and I'm going to be linking to several mostly free resources where you can take this work deeper, whether it's just strictly talking about sexuality or whether it's talking about the relational health of the field of you too, right? So I'm going to really give you a lot to work with in terms of the links and the resources. And we're really blending relationship health with sexual health in the context of a committed relationship. So again, if you're new to me or my work, there's a lot to dive into. There's a start here page on my website where I put, probably about 10 of the most foundational sources of free information for you to go deeper with how I teach about relationships and sexuality, in addition to learning more about me, my story. All of my work is really born from my lived experience of having to walk through the fire in relationships, coupled with 15 years now of professional experience as a psychologist and a breathwork teacher, working with over 1,000 people at this point, both individually and in groups. So I'm bringing from my heart to yours a lot of, lived embodied wisdom, still totally on the path with everybody. But I hope that this video was really helpful and helped you to understand why we need to reunify love and sexuality. And as I say that, I'm not even sure if there has been a time where truly love and sexuality have been unified. I'm not totally sure. I don't actually know of a time. But if you do, please let me know. And this is our time now to be able to understand the incredible healing power and evolutionary power of when we start to practice deep, deep love and care in our sexual exchanges with a partner. So much love, everybody. If you have any comments or questions, you can either comment below, you can get in touch with me directly over email or message me somehow. All of the ways to get in touch with me will be listed below. And I love to hear your thoughts, your feelings, your comments, and even just on a very basic level. Do you feel the difference between a sexual encounter where it's just on the physical level versus a sexual encounter where there is truly love and care? And what is the difference in terms of the quality? So, talk to you all very, very soon.